we will start. It looks like we don't have very many people that are outside the council or outside the panel. However, we're here to help whoever we can. So let's get started. So just as an introduction, the purpose of this webinar was to help companies that are thinking about exporting to the Middle East or are newly exporting to the Middle East. And perhaps from our collective experience amongst the panel, we'll have some information about challenges, opportunities, market conditions that can help you with your plans. So firstly, I'd like to introduce the panel. So we have Stu Donald. He's a partner in Southern Cross Trading, which is a sales agency responsible for sales and distributions of key brands such as Silver Fern Farms, Tegel, Atkins and Manuka Health. Stu will tell you a little bit more in due course. We have Sile Sweeney, who's the Trade and Commercial Advisor for NZTE, and she covers the territories of UAE, Qatar and Levant. We also have Tara Babin, who's a Research and Development Manager for NZTE, and she covers the territories of India, Middle East and Africa. So, and myself, I'm Tanya Foster, Head of International Sales for Tegel Foods, and I'm a member on the Executive Council for the Middle East. I'll now open it up to Stu just to tell you a few more things about himself, and then we'll go through to Sheila and then Tara.
I don't think Stu is on the call just at the moment, Tanya.
Okay, well, you'd like to fire away then?
Yeah, I'll dive in. Hi, everybody. I'm Sheila. As Tanya said, I'm the Trade and Commercial Advisor with NZTE, the UAE, Qatar, and the Levant. I formerly worked with Stu at Southern Cross and worked very closely with Tanya. So I've been with NZTE about 18 months now. And basically, my role is to help New Zealand trading enterprises focus customers with their export journeys in the FMCG space. So be that finding a distributor, be that distributor management, marketing advice, research, etc. Every aspect of the export journey we assist with. Thank you.
Tara?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Tara. I look after the research for the India, Middle East, and Africa. I look after all sectors. And essentially what I do is just provide market insights and like market data to our customers.
Oh, thank you. Just as a message to make sure we don't have any feedback, could everyone mute themselves? And then if you wanted to ask a question, just send it through on the chat, please. I think we've still lost Stu. Just a little bit of background on Tegel. We've been active in the Middle East market for over 6 years. We've had a few challenges along the way. So we've been in market, we lost our access to market, and we're back in market and growing. So I have personal experience on just how difficult it can be to enter new export markets. I'm going to facilitate this call today, but if anyone has any specific questions, they can come back to me via email or ask me at the end of the chat. I'm perfectly happy with that. So I'm not sure what's happened to Stu. It must be the lower North Island of New Zealand. It must have really bad connection. So I'll assume it's that. Southern Cross, as Sheila said, she's worked with them. They also are our agents in the Middle East. They have networks with over 80 distributors. They're active in retail, food service, and pharmacy. They've got about 40 people across the region. Stu recently moved back, well, about a year now, back to New Zealand, but he manages the business from fielding, along with partners, one in New Zealand and another one in Australia. And it works very well. So I'm going to start asking some questions. Oh, Stu, you're back. That's good. So I think we'll hit Stu with a question. So Stu, for people that aren't active in the Middle East, which country should they target first and why?
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I'll get my video going soon as well, so you can see my ugly face. Which countries should you target in the Middle East? The Middle East, as far as we call the Middle East, is effectively the GCC,
Yep.
the Gulf Cooperation Council. You're talking Saudi Arabia, which is the biggest market, around 30 million people. Then the rest of the, if you're coming into the Middle East market and you could target the GCC, 50% of your business in theory should come from Saudi Arabia. Then the rest is broken up evenly between the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and Oman. Then you can talk wider Middle East, and you can hit the Middle East, North Africa. You can hit the North African region, and you can capture a huge population across Egypt, Libya, Syria, right across to Morocco. And then you can capture the eastern side and you walk into Iran. So add another 150 million people. Across the whole region, there's 300, but the bulk of easy business or easier business is the GCC. And that's really where you need to be looking, because everything else gets a little too complicated.
Oh, thank you. A question for Tara then. What information do you have on each of the countries in the Middle East that could be made available to exporters looking to enter the market?
So we have a lot of information, especially like for the GCC, which is like the Gulf countries. So it really depends. I mean, I look after all of these countries as well as for like companies and customers within like different sectors. So if there's ever like a specific need, please reach out, because we either most likely have this information or would be easy for us to get it. So it could be like a country report, it could be specific data you're looking after, general market insights. It really varies.
Great, thank you. And a question for you, Sheila, in terms of understanding the market. If we're not in the focus customers, is there still a way that NZTE can help our entry into market or support us as we enter market?
No, Tanya, technically it's just the focus 1,400 customers that have access to the international teams. So it's about liaising with the customer advisor team in terms of reclassification as and when the time is right.
Okay, cool. Stu, a question for you. If you're assessing the Middle East opportunity, what are the 3 most important things you need to consider?
Assessing a Middle East opportunity, what are the 3 most important things you need to consider? Are you going to get paid? Can you manage the business while you can't be there? Because even in the normal world, it's a long way away, and a lot of the time you don't know what's going on the ground. And you know, a bit of biased here in terms of the way we operate, but yeah, have you got local presence? So that relates to the same thing. Can you manage it from afar? And then is there a market that suits your product? It has to be the right market.
So how do you think people need to go about determining that?
You've got to do your market studies. So NZTE have done, they keep building them. They've done some really good studies across the region and understanding the market and what products people are after. New Zealand's got an amazing presence in the Middle East, so we punch above our weight, and our products are really well accepted. So there is a good, what would I say, there's a good brand New Zealand loyalty in the region. So people are more acceptable of our products than they might be if they came from another country. But you really have to study the market. You have to talk to as many people as you can, get as many reports as you can, and in the normal world, make some visits, meet the people. Don't just take everyone's word for it. You really have to do your homework. You've got to do your homework.
Cool. Sheila, could you help from a regulatory side of things? Are there any key regulations that exporters need to be aware of?
Yeah, for sure. So that's obviously part of what we do in assisting with the export journey. In terms of, there's the very kind of obvious ones. So this, we're in a Muslim part of the world, so anything that has meat or meat containing products has to be halal. So for example, even when it comes down to the likes of a gelatin and things like that, they have to be halal. In terms of food registration, it's relatively easy here. It can be done as long as a company has a trade license, can go online and do it with Dubai municipality, and the registration just has to be done once, and then anybody can be the importer. In terms of kind of nutraceuticals and getting into the more pharma end of the FMCG space, it is much more difficult, and registration can take up to a year at times. And you also, in that instance, you have an importer of record, so only the person who has registered the item can import it, which then can get very messy if you want to switch distributors or switch importers. Along with our colleagues at MPI, we can advise on all of the various regulations and registration processes for the export journey to the UAE. In terms of just one of the very basic things is the Arabic labeling. While it is required, it can be done quite simply with just an Arabic over sticker, and there are just 7 things that need to be on that sticker, so it's quite doable.
Great, thank you, Sheila. If we're specifically thinking about entering the market, Stu, just thinking, and I know you have your bias on this, but let's get a viewpoint, and Sheila, you can input here as well. Through a distributor or direct, and why?
Okay, so I have a huge bias to through a distributor. It goes back to what I was saying, 3 important things being on the ground. If you go direct, you have to be, if you're going direct to say a retailer, you have to expect that may be your only business. If you're going to, say, one of the markets, Saudi Arabia, for example, and you pick up a big retailer, you pretty much have to then say that's our only business. That's my opinion, because you're blocking it down to, locking out other competitors. You're going to spend a hell of a lot of time dealing with the other end and what they do, and all the problems that you get. With a distributor on the ground, a lot of those problems go away. But a distributor has a business enough fighting to grow their business. So every day while they're there on the ground, if you've got a distributor working for you, then you've got, in theory, someone that's working hard to build your business. If you go direct to a retailer, then you want to build your business, you have to keep going to more retailers, or if it's HoReCa, more HoReCa. So then you've got 10 places you have to work with to try and build your business. So the danger is you may lose margin as it goes through to a customer, but working with a distributor means you've got a presence that's fighting to build your business every day hopefully while you're asleep. It doesn't always work, and it's not always easy, but it's not easy going direct to retailer or HoReCa either. So one of the simple way of looking at it is, how big do you want your business to be? If this is a market that's important and you want to capitalize on it, you've got to go to a distributor.
Cool, and I'll just provide a little bit of background from a Teagle's perspective in this. So Teagle actually went to market first through a retailer, and it built up quite a good business. However, now that Teagle are wanting to expand beyond one retail chain, it's become really difficult. Like, every conversation is about they're not happy that our products are seen in the other part of the market. So as Stu said, at least you've got a clear path with them. It becomes difficult, and you do limit the size of your business, and they do like to threaten to take it away if you then look to expand beyond them. So Stu or Sheila, how would you find a good distributor? Like, if we're based back here, we don't really know, like in New Zealand, we'd know who the top 2 or 3 are. How do we find a good distributor amongst everyone that'll have an ad on the internet?
Sheila?
So from our side, obviously NZTE know lots of the distributors here and can make various introductions. I think the first thing to do is to establish, what you want your distributor to do. Do you want them to be HoReCa focused? Do you want them to be retail focused? I have a list of I think it's 12 standard questions that I give to our NZTE customers to ask off potential distributors. So it very much depends on where your product where it will fit. Like, for example, we have some distributors, one of whom Stu works with very closely, who is very much, they're focused in that meat space. That's what they do. They're the experts there. Then you've other very, very large distributors, for example, Truebell, who just have thousands of brands. And they're really good, they're really professional outfits. But if you're a small company, you could get lost in the milieu very, very quickly. So it's about kind of coming into market with an idea of what you want, and then doing your due diligence across the board. I'm working with a customer at the moment who has a signed agreement in place in terms of sales targets and in terms of expectations around reporting on a monthly basis and marketing plans, none of which they have seen. And if they had engaged with me from day one, I would have told them that's not going to happen with that company. But they, rightly assumed there's a signed agreement, we're going to get what they've agreed to. But actually, Tara and I and Stu and Tanya all know just because it's signed doesn't mean it's going to happen in the Middle East.
True. Stu, can you give us a little bit of insight into how the market's actually faring since COVID, hospitality and retail?
Yeah, okay. Just before I say that, I'll completely back up what Sheila said. It's not always easy. Without a doubt, to me, the first place you go to is NZTE. They have a really good list of distributors, really good network right across the region, every country. And it might not be one office you have to go to. You might have to go to a couple of offices, but for sure, that's the best place to start. So in terms of how the market is at the moment, yeah, there's a lot of up and a lot of down. So, for example, anything that's related to making me healthy and keeping me from catching COVID, even if it's not real, but it's perceived as helping, is up. So a lot of pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, natural sort of honeys and things like that are up. But then anything food service has obviously been hammered. So take the meat, for example. Meat in the region is down for commodities into smaller restaurants and low end, but it's up in terms of retail and selling through retail to end customers. So it's really hard to answer how is the market faring. Probably the biggest challenge at the moment is the evergreen type problems that are it's transportation and shipping. So shipping out of New Zealand has been massively affected. For the bigger companies, the cost of shipping has obviously been affected. And then in market, people are still eating, they're still going to pharmacies, they're still carrying on living, they're just doing it in a different way. So I think Sheila could add to that in terms of how it literally feels being there, and probably got a better example of that.
Yeah, so what we're seeing here, and I think it's the same that's happened globally, retail has been the big winner in COVID. And what we've seen as well was a massive increase in sales via the various websites, spinneys.com, choicerooms.com, etc. I think we had 300% increase, Tara, was in Carrefour.com. I just heard on the radio this morning, Hayes surveys 50% of companies in the UAE had either reduced staff headcount or reduced spend on salaries. So, incomes are down across the board. Hotel occupancy last month was at 60%, which is phenomenal compared to where we had been, but is also crap on, what we would normally expect at this time of year. And it is skewed a little bit by the fact of the people who do live in hotels here. There was one hotel down on JBR, the Rotana, where it's like 90% occupancy, 90% of their occupants actually live there. But I think what's really working for us in terms of the recovery is the vaccination program. So as of this morning, we're at over 8 million doses of vaccines given out in the UAE. So it's only a matter of probably a few months before the entire population is vaccinated.
Cool.
And tourism could restart in earnest from September.
You want to be all vaccinated, ready for Expo, I presume. Yeah. I just want to touch on the shipping costs. So from a Tegel perspective, we have noticed that particularly with air freight costs to market. So one of the things that when we launched into market, we were always a premium brand because we were delivering fresh chicken from New Zealand, and you're actually in a completely different space to the local market. So it really didn't matter if you were 100% premium or 200% premium. That has stood us in good stead to get through these times when the freight rates have gone sky high. So from what was a highly profitable business, it's just an okay profitable business while we're having to cover the increased costs. So it's just something to bear in mind with your pricing strategy is things can get thrown on you, and can you weather the storm? The worst thing we could do is say we're going to withdraw from market because we're not making the profits we were. You actually have to be able to get through these tough times. And the retailers definitely will appreciate your loyalty coming into it. So yeah, that's from our personal experience. Another question for Sheila. In terms of New Zealand products, Stu touched on this, but how are we perceived across the Middle East?
I might actually throw that one to Tara, if that's okay, Tara, because we've done some research on this over the last year that she's across.
Cool.
Tanya, sorry, can you just repeat the question, please?
The perception of New Zealand products across the Middle East.
Yeah, so we've done 2 different studies. We did one last year, 2019, right before COVID, and we found that actually the consumer population in the UAE have a little to almost no idea about New Zealand in general or New Zealand products, which was actually like a really interesting finding, because that just showed that, you know, companies really need to invest in marketing to get people familiar with their brand and people talking about their brand. Because in a separate study that we did in August 2020, it showed the results were the same, where consumers don't really know almost anything, again, about New Zealand or New Zealand products. And we discovered, like, the insight was that they learn about specific country products based on marketing, familiarity, and word of mouth. Hence, we've really been recommending to go strong with marketing, especially around social media, because once they see people using your product, they get familiar with it and are willing to go and pay, you know, an additional few dollars to purchase something that's more premium. But to them, they're not aware that this product is premium.
Okay. Thanks. So building on then that, Sheila, what media is actually really effective in the Middle East? And slanting into what Tara said, how important is digital advertising in the mix?
So, and I remember, Tanya, when I was working with you a few years ago, we were amazed when I was like encouraging like newspaper advertising, kind of what is almost perceived as being dead in other parts of the world. So very traditional forms of advertising still work here. We have a beachhead advisor who's encouraging one company to take a billboard in Sheikh Zayed Road. So what you might think doesn't work or is now considered sort of archaic is very much still part of the marketing plans here. Having said that, obviously the digital space is incredibly important as well. Where we did a campaign with spinneys.com before Christmas, and as part of that, we also had worked with some influencers. And while the campaign was focused on Spinneys, what we've seen is the same brands that are in Spinneys and Carrefour, they saw their sales increase in Carrefour during the time period of the influencer campaign. Now that's a very bold, big statement. There was lots of other things happening in the macro space. But the brand themselves have said to me they're happy to say, yes, it certainly helped. So what we see is working with influencers, and research we've done, a lot of people use Instagram now, you know, to learn about new brands and to find new products. So that's something to look at, and it's something we've done as well, relatively cost effectively. You know, if you're working with a relatively small influencer, you can get content created by them, you can get coverage from them just in exchange for FOC products, as opposed to paying them to work with you. So that's something as well. And then there's in the kind of HoReCa space, you've the caterer, Middle East, hotel news, various publications like that are still, you know, widely read here. Sorry, I feel like there's an appalling echo when I'm speaking. Is there?
Doesn't sound like it to me.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Sheila. Andrew, I believe you'd like to contribute to the conversation.
Yeah, I guess as someone that's living up here, but also I've been on the other side of the fence of bringing 2 New Zealand companies into the Middle East in the past, and I guess, you know, our Muspa Group, which is a Saudi-based organisation, we act as a distributor for a lot of international brands. But one of the things is you need to make sure that you're working with a distributor where you'll get the share of mind. The comment was made before that you can work with some of the distributors up here that are actually out to get brands. And what some companies will do is they will sign up a brand to deliberately block them from getting into the market. So they want to be able to control the market more. So they'll take on and they'll make a commitment and then they don't follow through. And I know of a couple of companies in Saudi where they've fallen into that trap. They've signed up with a company and 2 years later, they're still not getting anything sold of their product. So it's important to work with a distributor that's going to give you share of mind with getting your market out, getting your products out there. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen while you're asleep. I'd certainly encourage anybody to get to any trade shows in the region. Obviously, we had Gulf Foods a few weeks ago, albeit on a slightly smaller scale. But when I first started coming up here 12 years ago, getting to the trade shows and actually seeing who your competitors are in the market is a very good way to be able to do it. And also at the moment, you know, making sure that you read the local newspapers online. You know, in Saudi, the Saudi Gazette, the Arab News. Part of the reason that restaurant business and restaurant meat sales has been down is because from the end of January to pretty much the end of February, beginning of March, Saudi Arabia went back into a lockdown. So all F&B outlets were closed except for pickup and delivery. And that had a huge effect on all of our restaurants in the kingdom as a result. And at the moment, because things are opening and closing, Jordan, for example, where I was a few days ago, they've just gone back into a daily curfew from 7 p.m. till 6 a.m. every single day. So at the moment, you kind of got to look at the newspapers and see what is actually happening in the market, because it is changing literally week by week.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Tara, I've got a couple of questions for you on demographics in the market. And particularly since COVID, is the population changing? And for companies like New Zealand companies, should expats still be the primary target?
Okay, so I'll answer the first question in terms of demographic changes. The answer is yes, but there isn't any tangible data to prove that. That is from our expertise at NZTE and a lot of our beachhead advisors. Like, we've had several conversations that yes, the demographics have definitely changed. I could talk a bit in terms of how we think if it's changed, but again, nothing like tangible. So how we think it's changed is a lot of people who are like high earning have lost their jobs, could not sustain the lifestyle here, given like schooling is very expensive. So a lot of expats have left, and the new expats that are coming in on a lower pay scale. So that also affects things like service, affects purchase. So in a nutshell, that's how it is. For the second questions, are expats still the primary target for New Zealand companies? Yes, but it's not just expats, it's also the local Emiratis. They're the highest earners, and the new generation are a lot more progressive and well-informed than the previous generation. So they look at actually eating healthier, feeding their children healthier, have the money and the knowledge of buying organic products, and can do so. So I would say it would be both, not one or the other. And just to keep in mind when we talk about expats, the UAE is made up of expats, but only 5% are actually Western expats, 19% are Arab expats, and then 11% is the local Emirati population. And then you have 54% who are from the Indian subcontinent, and 11% of Asian. So it's also important to keep that kind of breakdown in mind.
Okay, thank you, Tara. Building on that, Stu, just thinking in terms of, we kind of know where we think the expats shop. How do we reach the local people? Is there a different strategy to reach these customers?
For sure in the UAE, it's a little bit different. In Saudi, everyone pretty much shops in the same places, but there's a lot less. So there's definitely a different demographic that shops across different stores, and we sort of break everything into A, B, C class, so pharmacy or supermarket, and you can even say the same thing about HoReCa. But if you're, say, in Saudi going to a Panda supermarkets, you're going to everyone. You've just got a different range of where people live to the demographic. The demographic usually decides the where the expat's from in a lot of cases, and then to get, if you want your target market, so if your target market's the high end, you're obviously not going to sell a real high end product into a C-class pharmacy or a C-class supermarket. So you've got to talk to your distributor or your retailer. So talk to your distributor to talk to your retailer to say this is where our product should be placed. So the strategy with your marketing and your product placement, which is obviously the massively important thing, is to target where your product fits. Some products, for example, in the meat side of it, there is a commodity product that goes to small supermarket, small restaurants where the lower income earning Asian customer eats. And so you need a distributor that gets down and dirty and into those really small places. So it depends on your product, but your distributor should be aligned. If you've got a distributor in particular, your distributor should align and have the capability to get to those places. Andrew will tell you more, but in Saudi, for example, you might be going to 9,000 small, corner stores, the we call corner stores or dairies or whatever. To get to 9,000 corner stores, that's a pretty big distributor, a lot of trucks, or a sub-distributor wholesaler to get to those and cash vans. So you really have to understand your distributor, what capabilities they have to fit with your product to get to your target market. So it's not a real quick and easy question to answer. I hope that makes sense.
Yep.
I'd actually like to add just to that, if that's okay. So to answer that question simply, I would say yes, there is a difference between where some of the expats shop versus some of the locals. I mean, of course, there are places where they both shop at, but if you look at just the local Emiratis, a lot of them shop at the Union Co-op, and that's because being, UAE nationals, they get a discount, something like or 50%. So they don't go to the likes of like Waitrose or Carrefour because they would be paying full price. Something else to look for, Waitrose is usually the high-end income makers that shop there because it's a bit more expensive than other places. And another thing to add is not just in terms of the distributor, but it's also where the specific retail shop is placed. certain neighborhoods, the residents who live there come from a certain income. So if you want to target these high income makers, for example, you would look at Jumeirah versus Dera. Like the demographics really change over there. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Tara. So leading into another channel, Sheila, how important is online shopping now in the Middle East?
So online shopping just absolutely exploded as a result of COVID. So prior to COVID, Choitribs and Carrefour were online. I'm talking about the UAE specifically. So Choitribs and Carrefour were online. And then Gibson's had always been an online retailer and has really set the standard in terms of the consumer experience and consumer expectations. From speaking from a consumer point of view here, we're absolutely spoiled. So that's something, if for example your product was going to go direct to consumer, the expectations between the likes of the local retailers and then the likes of Amazon, consumers expect everything delivered within 24 hours in the UAE. So yeah, we've seen a huge boost in it. Spinneys actually told me, so Spinneys and Waitrose, who are the premium retailers here, they told me in early February that they would never go online. That wasn't part of their model. And then they had launched spinneys.com by June, and Waitrose, I think, launched in July or August. So everybody has gone into that space to varying degrees of success. As a consumer, the Carrefour delivery is shocking. It's really, really bad. I've used it a few times and then just gave up on it. As I say, Gibson's has set the standard. Spinneys and Waitrose are definitely getting there, but they're still just not as user friendly. Like the UX experience isn't great, but it is something that everybody has to focus on. And I think as well, it's no more than in any other part of the world, it's given rise to the potential to go direct to consumer. How many of these sort of steps along the chains, which are all taking margin, can we remove?
Thank you, Sheila. And another question for you in terms of communicating in a digital space and obviously in traditional media, how important is it to communicate in both English and Arabic?
You look great.
Actually, I might just give that one to Tara, the English or Arabic. We have some research around that, don't we?
Yeah, we do have some research. It's important, especially when advertising. The research suggested that when it comes to, whether it's billboards or online ads, just to have a simple translation in Arabic, it does help and it does come a long way.
Thank you. So that was kind of a lot of the questions that I thought of as someone new coming to market. I just want to ask for each of the presenters, what's the most important learning or must-do thing that from your experience or your knowledge or your research that you need to do or consider when entering the Middle East?
I think from my side, it's the identification of the correct partner. Whatever your route to market may be, finding the correct partner who gets you to market and who fulfills their obligations and the expectations you have is key to success.
Cool. Stu?
Yeah, that's a really good answer. That I would say that Sheila's got the best one. But the second thing I would say is do your numbers. You have to do your numbers. You have to be really, really aware of what it costs to get into market, what margin you've got at the end of the day. What if something goes wrong? It's numbers, numbers, numbers.
And can I ask you just one more question from a numbers perspective, Stu? You mentioned this in your opening comments. That are you going to get paid? Is that a common thing that you might supply products and then payments difficult?
Yeah, it's not. I would say it's a lot less common than it used to be. But if something goes wrong, so it depends on where you work. If you're working in GCC, if you're working in the UAE, It's pretty unlikely in the UAE. If you're working in Saudi, it's a little more likely, but yeah, it's pretty unlikely. But it's go back to what Sheila said. Who's your partner? If you don't know your partner, if something goes wrong, they just won't pay and they'll disappear and they'll hide. And you want to chase the money, then good luck. Go and chase the money. It's really, really complicated. Doesn't matter what you've got written, contracts, agreements. If something goes wrong, it's really difficult to follow up. So take it outside GCC and get into those other countries and get paid before you do anything. A really good story of a fish company, not a really good story, really bad story of a fish company a couple of years ago that got paid up front before they did anything, sending it into Iran. Somebody made a mistake and thought a part payment had come through, released their goods. The goods get up there. The profit from not having to pay for those goods for the company in Iran versus continuing to do business for 10 years and make a margin, they just kept the goods and didn't pay. And so then that company spent more than $100,000, quite a lot more than $100,000 trying to chase that money, and they didn't get anywhere. So you have to be really, really careful, but go back to what Sheila said, make sure you know who you're with, make sure you choose your partner really carefully.
And I would just build on that, make sure you've got good insurance cover. From a Tegel perspective, we had first-hand knowledge of that, where a container of product was sent. Sheila smiled, she remembers this. And when, I think, Sheila, you went to the offices to find out why we hadn't been paid and it was all shut down.
Yeah, and it was like we had this, it was a total scam, but it was so slick, we had full credit insurance, you know? So that's why, from our perspective, the recommendation is always payment up front, at least 50% up front, and credit insurance as well.
Oh, and a comment from Rachel, thank you, to consider the services of the Export Credit Office. Cool. Andrew, would you like to add any must-do learnings that, you know, from your side of being in the market so long, that you would recommend to new exporters?
I think, as I mentioned before, I mean, when I first came up here with a company in 2008, which was a manufacturing company in East Tamaki, we were looking at the Middle East as a new market. We went to a couple of industry trade shows. It gave us opportunity to be able to see, not just in the UAE, but across the region, who your market competitors are, and to talk to different distributors there, all in one place. So something that would take a couple of weeks to do, we're able to do in a couple of days. Relationships are very, very big here. It's not a fly in, fly out territory, and you've really got to spend the time in the market. People want to see you in the market, and as I mentioned before, that whole share of mind capability. And if I put on the other hat from a distributor point of view, is making sure that you have the market information available. I mean, we've even, it's a lot easier now, or will be once after the middle of May when Saudi opens up again properly. I mean, we've offered to, in the past, arrange visas for people to come into Saudi, to come and present to our organisation. And if you're going to commit to the market, then it's important to follow through, and because time and effort goes into organising those sort of things, and make sure that you have a pack together that clearly identifies who your competitors are, what your price point's going to be, because you get a lot of companies want to come into Saudi, and the easier you can make it for a partner or a distributor to be able to review the information, review your product, where it fits into the market, and not let them have to do it, the faster it will be, because nothing happens overly quickly in the Middle East. And, we're coming into the middle of April, which is going to be Ramadan. So although it's going to slow down even more than it usually does the rest of the year.
Thanks, Andrew. And Tara, our numbers lady, is there any one piece of data or info that you'd say this is the key takeout you need to consider?
I think in terms of like an advice I would give to the customers or companies is really know the markets and come with realistic expectations. I mean, of course, it's very important to find the right distributor, but there's a lot more companies need to be aware of before getting to that step. That's my like advice or one thing to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you. Well, I haven't seen any questions come up on the chat. So if anyone's got a burning question, if they want to send it through now. Otherwise, while we're waiting for that, I'd like to thank the panel for their expertise tonight. So Sheila and Tara from NZTE and Stu from Southern Cross and Andrew also, who's based in the Middle East and is on the council. I'd like to thank you for your input tonight as well. And thank you for everyone who's attended, for giving up your time. We hope there was some insights that you've picked up a nugget or two from this. If you have any feedback, please feel free to feedback through the link that was sent out. And if any specific questions, send them through to the council and we'll answer them directly. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night or a good day.